We're live. Okay, we're running live on Facebook, which means it all gets recorded, and tell your friends about it. It'll get out there for people to watch later on as well. Oh, thanks everybody for being here. It's exciting to do number 3. I'll do a little bit of review of What the Foot number 1. By the way, stole the title What the Foot's a really great book by Gary Ward, and he does a lot of talking about the pressure mapping systems that we use. His book is a little more about walking and running than it is about cycling, but the idea of using pressure mapping to figure out how people are putting force through their foot and how that force is making it onto the bike or running is the same ideas. So it's a really great book. If you're interested in diving into the deep biomechanics of the foot, it's a fun book. So myself and Justin, I'll start out by gabbing a bit, and then Justin will jump in, and we're going to do a nice case study with Joel today. The last one, What the Foot Part 1, actually, there's a really nice video online. You can see a little more about Joel and what's going on for him, though we'll do a little bit of interview with him today. So just a bit about me, physical therapist for 20 plus years now, bike fitter, certified strength and conditioning specialist who's been working with cyclists as well as non-cyclists of all levels over a long period of time. And the foot is, in the last 10 years or so, just struck me more and more as a foundation of the biomechanics of the body. Of course, there can be problems anywhere in the body that work their way into the system, whether it be the shoulder to the knee or whether it be the pelvis to the low back. But the foot being the place where we integrate or act on the world, if we will, where our force hits the ground quite literally. The foot, if anything's wrong there, it's going to frequently or most common send issues up into the rest of the system. So with that, finally the medical model, the Western medical model, is catching up to this idea of regional interdependence. You used to understand, if it was a knee problem, it was just a knee problem. But the medical model is saying, hey, maybe these things are connected, whether it be what's happening in our mouth to our gut, or what's happening in our gut to our brain, or in this case, the foundation that we stand on just might affect our knee, our hip, our back. And as I jump back here for a second, Thomas Myers has done some really nice dissections looking at the interconnected fascial chain, the calf as it continues its way up into the hamstring, and you can't loosen up one or tighten up one without tightening up the next. We frequently see, you get a stiff mid-back, and the next thing you know, the neck and the shoulders are uncomfortable because of that tightness in the fascia through this long system, whether it be the superficial back line, which is what we're showing here, or a lot of the cross lines that are running through the body. So Thomas Myers on fascia and these chains. Again, look back to lecture number 1 to go deeper into that. A lot of us think about the core and how important the trunk is relative to making sure there's good stability here. And if these deep core muscles are working well, then hey, we can produce better power through the chain. But I like to think about the core as a type of muscle. Types of muscles meaning we've got our big movers in our body, whether they be our quads or our hamstrings or our biceps. Those are very long muscles that are responsible for producing a lot of power. They're muscles that are responsible for producing a lot of movement. But if you go below those big phasic muscles, those on-off muscles, and look at the more static, the more tonic muscles, those muscles we collectively call the core. So in the abdomen, the rectus abdominis would be more of the big mover, or on the back side of that, the erector spinae would be more of the mover. And then underneath that, the transverse abdominis or the internal abdominal obliques, or in the back, the multifidi, would be the stabilizers. They're much more they're much more responsible for the quality of motion to make sure our form is good through here. Well, in the foot, the same thing happens. If the deep muscles of the foot, the core of the foot, if you will, are working well, it means that when we produce force down onto the pedal or down onto the ground, the foot is setting in a nice, efficient posture. The foot is stacked in such a way that the arch is able to work, and we can produce force without the foot or the knee collapsing. Because in essence, this is true. If we try to fire these big cannons off of a canoe, it doesn't work very well. If we fire these cannons off of a battleship, if that foot is locked up in a stable place, if the core of the foot is able to put our foot in an efficient biomechanical position, excuse me for a moment, if the intrinsic muscles of the foot, these muscles that come up through here and some of the muscles that come up into the calf, are able to efficiently lock up or put this bag of bones in a place where it's nice and stable and create this longitudinal arch. If those muscles, those core of the foot muscles, are able to lock the foot in a position, then it's going to be able to produce force as we push down. However, if those deep intrinsic muscles aren't able to get the foot in this position, and instead when the foot pushes down on the ground, it becomes a bag of bones and that foot just splats and rotates. If it inefficiently pronates, I'll say, if the foot inefficiently pronates as opposed to efficiently supinates, if the foot is dropping down and that core isn't working, then all of a sudden we start to see, let's see where we're going. We're trying to fire that cannon, a la we're trying to fire these muscles through a canoe as opposed to a battleship. So what that usually leads to is a, quote, overpronation, or I like to say an inefficient pronation, because when we try to put force down through the foot, we don't want the foot to be in pronation. We don't want it to be inefficiently pronated. We want it to be quite nicely rotated up and supinated. And that usually means that when the foot hits the ground, a professional cyclist I was working with, when the foot hits the ground, if the foot is dropping in and he's unable to use his foot efficiently, then his knee starts to collapse. He starts to find the core of his foot here. He starts to find the ball of the foot, the first med, and the intrinsics of the foot. And then you'll watch that knee as his brain figures out how to connect with these muscles. He's still figuring it out, yeah, and he's able to start to stabilize that knee. He had a fair bit of knee discomfort because that foot was falling in. I'm going to play that one more time for you just so you get that visual the first time through. Oops, wrong way. Come on, back up and play. There you go. You can see how that foot starts to collapse in. We'll do it one more time. That navicular drops. He inefficiently pronates as opposed to being able to lock up in a supinated position. Once his brain finds the intrinsics, he finds and reactivates, that muscle memory starts to come back alive. Once he reactivates those stabilizers of the foot, all of a sudden he has a stable foundation to stand on. Because the foot, in effect, should be able to, A, have a bag of bones as we hit the ground, to be able to efficiently pronate or splat, but also should be able to efficiently supinate as we push off. So this is what it looked like in a close-up. His brain said, will it play for me? Let's see if I can get it to play. His brain, when he would just relax his foot, his right foot knew how to engage these intrinsic muscles quite efficiently, where his left foot just didn't know. This was just him relaxing. It wasn't him pushing his foot in. It was just him going back into his usual position, a la an inefficient pronated position. And then he ended up having some issues, like I said, in his knee all the way up through his chain. And we woke up some of those muscles of his foot and some other things that made a difference for him. One more case example, a patient that walked in with some mid-back discomfort and who'd done all the things in the world to help her foot pain. And as we started to loosen up the other side of the chain, her mid-back was actually working its way down in the foot. So this is just to say that this is an interconnected chain, and what happens up top affects down below, not just what happens below affects up top. And when I loosened up her back, she went from having these hot spots where she was having pain to pretty immediately able to distribute the forces across her foot so that she didn't have this hot spot a la the pain at her first met. So that's the idea of interconnectedness. A really quick anatomy review. The front of the foot, the forefoot, if you will, the midfoot and the rear foot, if you will, the heel back here. And these bones, I'm not going to go into the detail, but just what happens so many times is there's some stiffness in one area of the foot, and because that area is stiff, then the foot can't efficiently either A, supinate itself or can't efficiently pronate or drop. Basically, in all cases throughout the body, we need two things. We need the ability for a joint to have enough motion, have enough flexibility, have enough excursion. We basically need enough range of motion. That's part A. The foot needs to have enough motion. But then once we have enough motion, we need to have good coordination around that joint. The brain needs to know how to activate the core muscles to provide stability. The brain needs to know how to lift up the arm with the right muscles and not in order to not hike the shoulder. Basically, we need good form around. Those deep muscles need to be able to engage in the right way. So if step one is enough flexibility, step two is basically efficient muscle memory or form or coordination. And then finally, once you've got mobility, you've got stability and coordination, the next step is, do you have strength over top of that? Okay, I can walk with efficient mobility, but do I have enough strength to be able to do a squat with load? Do I have enough strength to be able to run up a hill? Do I have enough strength to be able to run down a hill? So flexibility, and then we got good coordination and good form, and then finally enough strength and endurance. So anatomy, front of the foot, middle of the foot, rear of the foot, and then the heel back here. And then finally, if this is, quote, the foot, the joint just above it, the ankle joint. The ankle joint is very responsible for hinging, where the foot is very responsible for being able to do this, quote, pronation and supination moments. Again, if you're more interested in this, jump back to number one. I'm breezing through it pretty quickly here. And I've talked a lot about efficient pronation. If everyone puts their hand on their lap and just let your hand flatten out, you'll see how the hand gets longer as your hand pronates. For a lot of people, if you put your hand on your lap and then you lift up your, quote, big toe and your first toe, and then keeping that lifted up, take your whole hand down again, and you'll see that's what inefficient pronation looks like. A la the foot tips, as opposed to efficient pronation, the foot is able to splat. If you are back in a supinated position, that is a very stable structure. If you're pronated, that is a very unstable structure. And obviously on the bike, we need to be able to keep the foot in a supinated, stable structure as we push down. There's not a lot of need on the bike for much pronation like there is in life. In life, the foot hits the ground and it has to be able to efficiently splat on the ground. We want that bag of bones, if you will, when the foot hits the ground to be able to absorb the shock. But on the bike, when the foot hits the pedal, we want it to be very stable, very locked up, very controlled to be able to produce power. Okay. Talk a little bit about some of the issues around the foot. There's a lot of different diagnoses here. But so many times what I see is that a lot of these, besides for mechanical issues of the foot, flexibility, strength, coordination, so many of these issues around the foot come back to the shoes. It's all about the shoes. There's so many times on the bike it's about the shoes. And there's a lot of different things that pop up about the shoes. But the first one, quite simply, is if you put your hand in a glove that's too tight, imagine what that does to your hand. And for so many of us, especially here in the West, where our feet are wider than they are over in Europe, we end up with a shoe that's too narrow. Though it might be long enough, it might not be wide enough. And just because your foot will fit in the shoe, it doesn't mean that the base of the shoe, I'll just use this, it doesn't mean that the base of the shoe is wide enough. What happens many times is the upper is wide enough, but the base is a little bit narrower than your foot. So one side of your foot either falls off or the other side falls off, or the upper starts to squish you. And so many times a lot of these issues around feet come to the width of the shoe. So I do this really fancy test, or we do this really fancy test called the draw test. Meaning you draw your foot on a piece of paper, and then, can I borrow your cycling shoes for a moment? Can you pull the insert out of them? So you draw your foot on a piece of paper, and then you take the insert out of your cycling shoe, because the insert represents, if it's the one that came with the shoe, the insert represents the width of the base of the shoe. And then when you say, well, I've got an outline of my foot, and now I have an outline of what the inside of the shoe looks like, and you say, well, how do those things match? And so many times this is what happens. So there is your foot hanging out over the edge of the shoe. So your foot, here's the bottom of the shoe, and your foot's hanging out over the edge, and you go, oh, that's going to cause some problems. So if the base of your shoe is narrower than your foot, that's so many times what's causing either metatarsalgia or numbness in the foot or pain or even just decreased power. Because if you squish your foot from the upper, your body isn't going to be willing to produce force down through that shoe. So it's a really simple test, and before you buy a cycling shoe, walk in with your foot drawn on a piece of paper, pull this out of the shoe that you're buying, and just drop it on. It'll save you a lot of discomfort and probably a lot of cash. And so many times the shoes that we buy just aren't wide enough for us. Look for some of the wider shoes. There's a lot of them. Lake, CD Mega, Specialized makes them. The US providers are starting to realize that, hey, we need wider shoes. Because when you take a foot that's supposed to look like this and you squish it in a shoe that's too narrow, you start to get some issues. Whether that shoe is a cycling shoe or in this case high heels, the big toe gets squished over a little bit and the toes start to get cramped. And then you put that shoe and put a pedal on top of it, and now it hurts even more. And when you put those two things together, it never really looks that good, right? And it never really causes the right feeling. And in the big picture, it's kind of crazy. But yeah. So if number one is the width of the shoe, number two is the length of the shoe. That's pretty obvious. You've got to make sure that the foot actually fits in. And then finally the volume, meaning does the shoe have enough height for your foot? Some people have a foot, I'm going to give this back to you. Some people have a foot that has quite a bit of height, and their shoe isn't actually fitting that height. So anytime they even tighten the buckles a little bit, they start to squish their foot into that pronation, or they start to squish their foot down against the base. So make sure that as you just tighten up a little bit of those buckles or the straps that you've actually got, you're not immediately squeezing the foot. And by the way, more stress with the buckles and straps rarely leads to more power. It usually leads to pain, discomfort, and a more inefficient foot. So the width, the length, and the volume. So next as I think about treatment and issues around the foot, so many times orthotics or inserts can make a really big difference because just a little bit of support underneath the arch in a cycling shoe has very little negatives. There's very few people that can't use a little bit of support and a whole lot of positives. It keeps the foot in a little bit more of an arch and a little more stability. Whether those are just an off-the-shelf Trek or Specialized or Superfeet or something that is custom really depends upon your needs. Okay, and then cleat placement, finally. If the cleat is too far forward or backward, there's issues. For most people, when I see issues around the foot, it's the cleat being a little bit too far forward. It ends up providing too long of a lever arm. It ends up pinching, I'll just use this, it ends up pinching a little bit more on these arteries and these nerves that come through here. As the foot pushes down, it splays a little more and it pushes into that. So a cleat that's set up halfway between your first and your fifth, or you can just say at the back of the first metatarsal, the cleat and the pedal axle should be setting here as opposed to here or especially here. So many times that cleat is forward and that can cause not only foot issues, but the more forward the cleat goes, the more back the foot goes, and the more back the foot goes, it requires more ankle motion, it puts more stress on the knee. So cleats that are set in the right place, a neutral position, if you will, is really quite critical for treating some of these issues, or for that matter, just providing more power. Because if a cleat or a foot isn't in the right shoe or isn't in the right place, it starts to cause some significant issues. And those things can really cause a lot of pain. I mean, a professional, Oscar Freire, sitting in the wrong shoes for a lot of years, you can see how squished up that foot gets. And yeah, right? It's just like, yuck. Not a nice place to be. So from a treatment standpoint, we need to make sure that people have good mobility. As I've talked about before, is the foot mobile, is the calf mobile. We need to make sure that they've got good strength and good coordination of the foot. Can these muscles work well? And then finally, the fitting side, and that's what we're going to spend most of our time here today on, is let's look at what's happening inside the shoe with pressure mapping, and let's see what we need to do with changing the cleats or changing some inserts in order to get the foot in the right place. Because when it comes right down to it, the integrated treatment or the integrated approach works so much better. Meaning, as a physical therapist, I can't treat out these problems. I need to make sure that a bike fits right. And as a bike fitter, we can't treat out these problems. We need to make sure that there's a strength training program, a personal trainer involved. And we can't just strengthen out these problems. Sometimes there's a system here that's not working very well. They're not eating well, or they're eating a lot of sugary foods, or they've got some other medical issues, or they're not sleeping well. We need to have an integrated approach to these problems. And without that integration, so many times these weak links in the chain, this is just a symptom of some global issue that needs to be looked at or treated. I can't tell you the number of times I've just seen people have issues in a local place, and people have been treating that local place when they needed something that was just really holistic. It's such a common issue. So the gentleman I was working with before, you saw his foot when he did a backward lunge, and you saw his foot when he relaxed it. When he pushed on the pedal on the left side, he was able to contact that ball of the foot. He was able to push down through the first metatarsal, and when you push down through that first metatarsal, it helps engage the stability of this long medial arch. And when he pushed down on the left foot, you can see he could find the outside of his foot, but his muscular coordination for finding the inside of his foot just wasn't there. And so what that meant is when he pushed down on the pedal, he was pushing here. And so the next thing you know is, in order to get down to that pedal, he had to collapse. He had to inefficiently pronate because he couldn't get his first met down to the ground. He wasn't able to keep a stable, stacked foot when he pushed. And that's that lack of ability to get the first met down, whether it be from mobility issues or, for his case, from a coordination issue, that started to drive into his system. So with that, we're going to interview Joel a little bit, talk about some of his challenges, and then we're going to look at him on the bike. Any questions thus far? Any questions thus far? Beautiful. Joel, we are going to grab this seat. Actually, I'm going to grab a table. Will you help me out for a second? And we're going to drag this kind of over this way. Let's dump this right here. Let me know whether that works for you. Joel, I'm going to have you grab a seat, and we're just going to chat for a minute. Will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Joel.
Nice. How much
do you want more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. How much do you cycle? What do you do for a living?
I'm a sports massage therapist here. I cycle about 3 or 4 times a week.
Awesome.
Mountain bike, road bike, gravel bike.
Awesome. Any kind of bike. Yeah, you and I are both passionate about bikes. Yeah. Obviously, your road bike's sitting here, and you run speed plays.
SPDs.
SPDs, thank you, my brain. On all your bikes?
On all my bikes, that way I just have
one pair of shoes.
Pairs of shoes, and I can walk around when I get off the bike.
Yeah,
I like to be able to do.
I've taken some nasty falls trying to walk in the road. Yeah,
exactly.
Perfect. What else should we know about your cycling?
When I do a lot of vertical here in the mountains, and so that's when I start getting foot issues. Pretty much.
Tell me about your foot issues.
So on my left foot, I tend to get pain on the outside edge.
Yeah.
The fourth toe.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll get a cord on that outside edge, which can be really painful. So if I do a lot of on that lateral side, so if I do a lot of climbing, is when that seems to come up.
Got it.
On this side, I also have running track in high school. I developed a medial meniscus issue.
Right.
And I had a ski accident, and I stressed the anterior cruciate ligament, so my knee's a little sloppy, and it has always been.
Got it.
Listening to you talk, I now assume that it's probably connected somehow. Yeah,
frequently it's the onion grows larger as we have these issues, and sometimes it works its way up one link, or sometimes it'll skip links and go further up the chain. On What the Foot One, we had some interventions around mobilizing your foot and even some exercises. Tell me about your foot since then. Has there been any, what's changed, what's not changed?
I don't know that I've done enough to notice a big change.
Awesome.
I've also I had a vacation that involved a lot of driving, and
Yeah.
it's been uneven.
Awesome. So we'll take a look at your foot today. So outside of the foot, fourth and fifth digits, I'm hearing a lot of pressure on the outside of the foot.
A lot of pressure on the outside.
Okay, and then a little bit of an old knee discomfort.
Right.
Yeah. What else should I know?
So I'm a massage therapist. I stand up on my feet all day.
Yeah.
My feet will get tired, and sometimes I will feel that in the medial arches on both sides. Or
Got it. So, so there might be a challenge with some endurance there with the fatigue that you're feeling, and particularly as I think about the inside arch and the necessity for the foot to be able to stay in a relatively neutral position as you put force through your feet all day. So that's a good insight. So just to say, this is an incredibly brief evaluation. I have a little bit of history before that, and a brief. We usually take 2 or 3 hours to go through the process. With that, let's take a little bit of a look at your feet. Go ahead and slide off both shoes. Oh, please.
So I've tried a bunch of different things. What I have currently are Shimano Easy Bake Oven shoes. I don't know what the technical term is, but basically they
That's the
mold them
technical
in
term.
What's that?
That's
That
the technical
is
term.
technical.
The question just for the audience, what have we tried thus far? The Shimano Easy Bake Oven shoes, yes.
So they shrink to fit. So I got a wide forefoot and a narrow back foot. So
Yeah.
that's helped a lot. I've tried different orthotic things. I tried the Specialized shoes that have got the Met Head bump
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and those just drove me insane.
Got it. Because of the pressure in that spot?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It looked like a cool idea, but it didn't work for me.
got it. Yeah, sometimes that Met Head, though it's standard across population, isn't standard for you, doesn't fit you. So sometimes a metatarsal bump makes a lot of sense and works really well if it's in the right place for you and if it's the right size. Because some people need a large arch and a small Met Head, and some people need a large Met Head and a small arch. So that's where we start to talk about the potential custom or modification of the stuff that's out there. So yeah, what else?
What else have I tried?
Yeah, if anything.
That's mostly it. I cycled through a bunch of different shoes, so I found shoes that didn't cause me agony, and then I just stuck with them. In fact, I bought these new old stock because they stopped making these.
Yeah, that's another really good note. If you find something you like, especially in shoes, buy a couple of pair because they'll stop making your favorite one. Or saddles are the same way. The contact points, shoes and saddle, if you find something you love. Also, I heard you say a moment ago that you found a shoe that you liked, and when you did, it made some difference for your foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's a lot. I can go a lot further before I start having the issues.
Yeah.
I still have the issues if I increase the distance or the amount of climbing.
Yeah. So the climbing tells me that there's some force issue here, meaning the more you push on the pedal, and that says that there's something about your biomechanics that are probably challenging. But just to come back and pause for a moment to say, there's a lot of us out there that have a narrower, quite a narrow heel relative to the forefoot, and that finding a shoe that really fits that forefoot is really critical. And sometimes that's enough to take away the problem. In your case, it was enough to help some. Yeah, and so that's where we were with the lecture. Any other notes on that?
So interesting that you were talking about to make up for the inefficient pronation.
Yeah.
You may have that internal rotation.
Yeah.
So I think I'd mentioned I bought a mountain bike.
Yeah.
That accommodated the fact that my knee liked to dive in.
Okay.
So I was trying 2 different mountain bikes, and I kept hitting the top tube on one, but I didn't hit the top tube on the other one. So I thought, oh, this is the one for me, not realizing it was just allowing me to have a dysfunction without causing me to whack my knee on the top tube.
Yeah, and I'll do some repeating for the audio here. Yeah, it's so common to see some differences with one side versus the other when there's more of a foot dysfunction there, and so many times it'll show up. It's like the accommodation is allowed. In this case, the mountain bike allowed for your knee not to be hit.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Ooh, I like the analogy. We have a health account in our body, and so many times there's these signs like a knee that's falling in or hitting a top tube that our bank account is getting low, and then eventually the bank account gets low enough that we bounce a check and we start to feel pain. But people go, but it just suddenly appeared. Well, if we pay attention along the way, usually we start to notice, oh, the knee is falling in, or I don't feel as powerful on that leg, or when I squat, my pelvis turns. If we really listen to the whispers of our body, many times those early smoke detectors, if you will, tells us that our bank account is slipping, and we can catch it before we actually fall in the hole. You know, I'm feeling a little grumpier today. Oh, I didn't get enough sleep last night. Oh, I didn't get enough sleep for the last week or two. Next thing you know, I've got back pain. So if we start to listen to whatever that is, we can usually get an idea that our body is slipping into a hole even before we start to have pain. Because then we bend over and pick up a pencil and our lumbar herniates. And we have a disc herniation. Well, it wasn't picking up the pencil. It was all the slumped sitting and the twisting that we did over the last 15 years of our life. So looking for those symptoms and signs early on. Okay, any other questions or anything else we should know before we jump in? Okay, I want to do a quick review of your feet, and if you'll slide the pressure maps in those, and then you'll be on.
You want me to take my socks off?
Please do.
Okay.
How are we doing? Beautiful. And I'm going to have you, oh, that's okay. I collect mine in my belly button. I'm going to have you step up there for me.
Okay, standing up?
Yes, please.
And facing
that way. Okay. So it'll be somewhat obvious, but not somewhat obvious, depending upon your eyes, the difference in Joel's feet. So as I look at this foot and I look at this ankle, what I see is a relatively vertical foot here. In other words, this foot is stacked, much like the Cliff guy that you saw, the Cliff guy. I'll just use that name for the moment. Let your knee bend here a little bit on, yeah. And as he bends his right knee and then go again, you see that this knee on the right side tracks relatively straight over that second toe. Go one more time, meaning that when this arch is supporting him, then it provides like a tripod leg. It provides stability up through the knee. When this arch is being able to be up and when the ball of the foot can get down to the ground, he has stability through this chain. And then what he was talking about earlier, shift a little more your weight to this side, and then start to squat on this side. And then you see that top tube getting hit here, so to speak. As he starts to put pressure through his left leg, this arch starts to collapse, where this arch is able to lengthen, able to splat. This arch drops to the inside, and then just go again. And his knee follows to the inside because he's not able to maintain stability through here. Whether that be some stiffness in the ankle or the foot, or whether that be lack of coordination control, don't know yet. Actually, I know a little bit because what the foot won, and we talked about it a bit. So you can see the difference in biomechanics here. And if I come over to his right foot and just relax there for me for a minute, and I try to, and you're fine keeping some weight on it, if I try to lift up the ball of his right foot and the ball of his fifth med and his outside here, he's pretty equally distributed. If I try to lift up this side, I just have a really hard time, and that's relatively quite easy. If you just lift up the front of your foot over here and then let it drop on my fingers, don't worry about me. He's pretty, again, equal here. I could be happy with my fingers being underneath both of these, and then lift up, and then lift up here, and then drop down on that. And ouch, my left finger is not very happy. Does it feel any different to you on the inside, outside?
Yeah, definitely. It's painful being on your outside finger.
Yeah, and then that's some of the area you get discomfort at, is that right? Okay, so he's just much more loaded through here, and we'll need to figure out the why that is. And just to say, we are really focusing on the foot. This could very well be a knee problem working its way down. It could be a low back problem. Anywhere in his chain could be driving load into that foot. That's an important evaluation process that I would need to go through as a PT, or we need to go through as a practitioner. Because so many times, and I'm going to exaggerate for a second as I crawl up here with you, sometimes what happens, especially with our cyclists, is we break a clavicle or we break a rib, and just let me move you a little bit, and we end up with this tightness up in here, and the next thing you know, that tightness is twisting its way down into the foot. So all of this system is really interconnected, and it's important to look through the system, figure out what is truly the driver of the system. Today we're focusing on the foot and assuming that it's coming from there. I do know that there's some mechanical dysfunctions down there, and there's a nice history there. So that's a little bit of the evaluation that I would do off the bike, if you will. I'd do a little bit more. Actually, let me do one more thing and have you actually grab a seat here. Are you able to get his feet down there, or should I pull him over a little bit? Yeah, go ahead and stand up. We're going to go that way. Almost. Yeah, we'll go back if we need to. You're fine. Thank you. So we see the same thing here. Let me have your leg. We see the same thing here with his knee pointed straight ahead. You can see how much this lower leg, the tibia if you will, likes to turn out, and his foot starts to hit the ground, how much he hits on the outside of the foot and then collapses to the inside. And this stability of this foot, I'll bring it back to the same place as the other one, the stability of this foot versus the stability of that one. That's noticeable. Yeah. So the amazing thing, and where is my foot at? The amazing thing, it's okay, thank you, is that just the, I'm going to use your leg here, because of the mechanics of just a passive arch, forget all the muscles for a moment, when we have a keystone structure and we have an arch that gets built up, just that arch gives you a lot of stability. So if I put his foot in a more neutral position and then just try to relax there for a second, just more neutral, all of a sudden that's a much more stable structure as opposed to the structure where the inside line gets long and the ball of the foot starts dropping. So getting this foot in more an efficient place will be helpful. Well, let's see what that looks like on the bike. So I'm going to have you slide your socks back on. There we go. And I'm going to give you to Justin. I'm going to pull this guy out. I guess the other way would have been easier. Do that. And Justin, if you'll spend a moment introducing yourself, and I'm going to help flip this around. So we're going to move this guy. It just happened that we had, kind of like last time, had some technical issues, and we ended up with this being our projector. Questions thus far?
Is the pain like a burning pain or a sharp pain? Can you describe it?
Interesting question. It just becomes constant and nagging. So it's not burning, but it is pretty sharp.
And how long does it take?
How long does it take? I can do 30, 40 miles flying if there's not a whole lot of climbing, but if I go do some climbing loops after a couple thousand feet of climbing, it starts to really come on.
Yep. And after you stop riding, when does it go back to normal?
Oh, it stops as soon as I get off the bike, basically. My foot will be tired with the pain. I don't have that sharp pain anymore. So my foot will be tired. What's that?
You're lucky.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although on the outside of that fourth toe where I developed before in last summer doing a lot of climbing, that's really hard.
I got it.
Okay. Use the little corn pads to burn that stuff off, which is also not fun.
No. I'm Justin Lucky. I work here at Revolutions Fitness with Curtis. Got quite a bit of fit training in my background. I've gone through all of Trek's training and spent quite a lot of time working with Curtis, working on all the different ways to approach this. And today we're looking at Joel and revisiting what we'd done before. And you can kind of see up on the screen here, at least you can get a sense of the heat map of the original pressure map run that we did during the last lecture. And it's showing something similar to what we were talking about, how you can see the pretty heavy on the outside of the foot on both sides, and not really getting great contact with the first metatarsal head. So not optimal from a force down on the pedal standpoint, not optimal from a stability standpoint, potentially leading to a lot of discomfort elsewhere in the system. And so what we've got is, again, we've got the pressure mapping technology. GBO-Mize is a German company that makes these insoles that go into the shoes that create this readout, and they literally show where pressure is and how intense that pressure is. We're connecting it to him right now, and then it also, we were going to bring this in, I don't think we got this in last time, where it connects cadence data to the pressure mapping, so you can see not just the absolute magnitudes of pressure, but also where in the pedal stroke the pressure is occurring, which is a really, really fun way to approach the foot pressure thing, because then you get info that you can use to pin down what's going on and how it's happening. And the other really nice aspect of this is that, I think Curtis had mentioned this earlier, ultimately the foot is where the force is getting down to the, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and being able to validate what's happening in terms of that transfer is really, really strongly connected with how efficient and how powerful you're going to be on the bike. And so it gives us this benchmark, not just in terms of comfort, but also in terms of performance. And we're just connecting to the system now. There it is. It's Joel's feet. And just go ahead and pedal and just kind of assume your normal position there. Maybe throw it in the big ring, get a little bit of oomph into it. There you go. Eyes down the road, just kind of pedal along. Let's see what we can get out of this. And you can see it dancing around on the screen there. All right, you can stop. And not quite as much load on the trainer this time, so the magnitudes aren't quite the same, but you can really see the distribution well, showing up strongly on the outside of the shoe. And the right foot's the one that has the inefficient pronation, Curtis, is that correct?
The left.
The left foot? Okay. Right, that's right. I remember you standing on the podium.
Can I do that?
Yep.
And we can work from behind.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. And
That's a recipe for pain.
yeah, not the most efficient way to be to getting power to the pedal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
I might point you in a moment. For the moment, so if this is the foot and you can outline it, what we should see is pressure across the entire foot. And right now, on both sides, it's the same. Not efficient, but he's got all the pressure on the outside of the foot as opposed to really blocked across the entire foot. Again, and both sides are
Heavily loaded on the outside versus the inside, and then you saw the pressure map that was from the Cliff Rider earlier, where it showed a nice distribution over particularly on his functional foot, where you could see nice pressure over the first met head over the ball of the foot, meaning that you're able to connect that force through in an efficient way. The arch isn't collapsing, the foot's stable, you're getting that good strong support through the foot to be able to connect power all the way through the drivetrain. And when you lose contact with that, when you have this kind of structure where all that pressure is on the outside, it makes it really hard to, particularly to get the glutes connected down to the pedal when you're really firing an extension. So ideally you want to see that change so that you can start to see some pressure moving across more of the forefoot in particular. And in terms of how Joel's cleats are set up, one of the things that we can look at, let's just come to a level crank here in front and just stop right there and check in on where that cleat is. Curtis had mentioned having that cleat set up so that the first metatarsal head is in front of the pedal axle, and then it pretty well bisects the first and fifth metatarsal head, and it's actually set up pretty well already on Joel's cleats here. It's just about perfectly bisecting the front of the foot, allowing for good good support there. We're not putting a lot of strain onto the small bones and the toes, getting good support across the metatarsal heads. And one of the things you mentioned, having trouble using the specialized inserts before, the footbeds. Do you remember specifically which one you used?
It came with a mountain bike shoe, so.
Oh, okay, and it had a prominent metatarsal bump on it. I think they may have revised that slightly. The newest iteration of them isn't as aggressive in the.
This was probably 2 or 3 years back. So.
Okay. It might be worth at least seeing what we can see in terms of the pressure mapping, trying to get some support up under the arch of the foot and seeing how that changes where the load is, and if we can get a little bit more across the forefoot. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let me have you hop off the bike. I'm going to disconnect you real quick. Okay, you are clear from the bike. And go ahead and just have a seat here and
Swap out some.
yeah, we'll just try these out, and these are even if the metatarsal head still feels a little aggressive, we'll hopefully be able to see a little bit of that in the shoe pressure and the foot pressure, but then also be able to get a sense of what that extra arch support does for your feet. So don't worry about the insoles. We'll disconnect those and get those back in. Boom. And let's see here. Again, this is one of the good uses of the foot pressure technology, is that it really lets you make this kind of change, see what's going on inside of the shoe, and get some data to help support the decision on whether or not it makes sense to use it. There's a lot of other things that can go into it, but it's just yet another way to look at what's happening on the bike in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do, just literally looking at the person. So, all right. Let's try this one.
Like Cinderella.
All right, go ahead and slip that shoe on. Yeah, we haven't. Yeah, we should. We should. Okay, I'll get you Velcroed up here. Reconnect. Where's the other end? Here it is. Okay, pop back up on.
Definitely feels like there's more volume of them.
Yeah, that's the big thing, is a lot of times you'll get the inserts in there, and the key thing here in particular is you don't want 100% correction in terms of that support. You want to be able to get enough in there to keep it from totally collapsing, but if you were to give 100% arch support in there, it'd probably feel like standing on a towel all the time or something. It's not very comfortable, and it ends up over-correcting and putting the knee too far out of its neutral range. So, but how does that feel when...
So far, so good.
Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel any in terms of that metatarsal bump. Are you noticing that at all? Is it?
No.
Okay, that's good.
Definitely not as intense as the shoes were.
Okay, cool. Go ahead and pedal again. How's the load on there feel? Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
So the general idea is the goal is to distribute that force a little bit better. We'll see what happens here, but to make it so that all that pressure isn't just on the outside, and we bring the foot up to, a little bit. We bring the ground up to the foot, so to speak. So it'll pop up in a second, but I'm just starting to see maybe a little bit more on that inside. And again, apologize for the light issues.
different.
It looks wider anyway.
Yeah, it's spreading it over a larger area. It's still heavily concentrated on the outside of the shoe. And so one of the things we might start looking at here is stance width, is the idea of if you're having trouble getting pressure into the ball of the foot on the inside of the shoe, maybe because they're too far inboard, they're too far towards the center line of your body. And so if we spread the stance width apart a little bit, that may bring the feet up underneath you a little bit more effectively and allow you to get force down into the pedal more. And one way you can experiment with that is literally to unthread the pedals a little bit. Obviously you can't ride like that, but go ahead and I'm going to disconnect you again. Oh, you're not connected, never mind. Go ahead and pop off. And just literally space the pedals out a little bit and see what that does. Because in the controlled circumstances that we have here, then we can get away with doing things that wouldn't be possible on the road. But they do make pedals that have longer axles. So that's a way to, sort of a lever that we have to be able to pull to affect where force gets into the pedals. Okay.
Back on?
Yes. All right, give that a pedal and let's take another look. Sorry if I'm blocking your view here. And even looking at the live pressure, it's definitely different on the left. It's different pretty well all over, actually. Filled in a little bit more, and actually getting on the left side in particular, being able to get, without my pointer here, I'll physically point, but you can see where there's significant contact happening with the first met head on the left side. Still having some issues on the right side. That's going to take a little more investigating in terms of exactly what's going on, but it's really encouraging to see, wow, I mean, we're spacing the pedals out 2 millimeters, and all of a sudden we go from no pressure on the first met head to equal pressure across the outside and the inside of the foot. And that's a really significant change that we wouldn't really otherwise be able to tell anything about just by talking to them. Yeah, how does it feel? I don't know, how does it feel? But this gives us that extra dimension of the subjective experience backed up with that data. So, and in terms of like the next thing, maybe looking at a higher arch support, seeing what it looks like getting a little bit extra support under the shoe. So let's do that next. Go ahead and pop off.
You want what size?
Yeah, he's got blues. So,
yeah. Is that the right size?
And so then, this lets us quickly move through things, make changes, and see what happens. And what we're switching to is here we've got the basic specialized insoles. We went from the medium height one to the higher arch. In their nomenclature, that's a plus to a triple plus, or a blue to a green.
So, and are we changing on both sides?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then this is where it's going to be really important in how it feels, because you start running into that sensation of having something wadded up under your foot. So.
So we think about taking care of Joel on both the bike fit side of things, accommodating for his tightnesses and making sure the bike matches him. But we also need to make sure that we take care of the body side of things, meaning that getting his body in as an efficient a position as possible. He has some mobility challenges in his calf and his foot. He also has some coordination challenges in his calf and his foot. Both things are going to make it so those pressures change. If we get his body in a more healthy place, then all of a sudden he's basically has more resilience, has more adaptability,
Cool.
so that he's not, as you would say, the princess so much. A body that's very adaptable is a body that can tolerate a lot of different things.
go ahead and pedal. And then let's take a look. And at least looking at the live pressure, we'll see the magnitudes of force when we pull it up here, but the that actually almost looks like it brought maybe even a little bit too much underneath the arch. It's hard to say. It just based on where the load is, you start to see a lot of load under the arch itself, and that's not really productive in cycling terms. You want to see most of the load across the metatarsal heads, and so it looks like it may be lifting his arch up a little bit too much out of the shoe, and almost you get to a certain point where it can actually kind of suspend the ball of the foot off the shoe.
And I do notice the pressure in the arch.
Yeah, you can feel that, unlike with the blue ones.
Right.
Interesting. And so that tells me that we overcorrected with the green insoles, and that we want to pull back to the blue ones. And one of the things oftentimes that we'll end up doing is, particularly when you see something like this where it looks like they're having trouble getting the ball of the foot down to the shoe, is to use a wedge. This is a 1.5 millimeter tall Varus wedge. It builds up the space underneath the first metatarsal head so that the foot, which is relatively inefficient, and which Curtis just mentioned, is something that can be helped, and you can work on the body, you can make it more efficient. But in the meantime, with that stiff foot and you're having trouble getting the first met head down to the shoe, the Varus wedge goes in underneath there and takes up that space and brings the shoe up to the foot, so it doesn't have to distort as much. So go ahead and hop off the bike. And let's...
What questions are popping up?
Question. I want to go back to those 3 points you made earlier: the flexibility, strength, and then the middle one was
Muscle memory, essentially.
Yeah.
Come on. So,
yeah. The answer to the question is, it seems to me what you're saying is if you can get the flexibility improved, and provide some ability for the foot to have a natural position, it will find the appropriate muscle memory. Is that the premise?
And not really, honestly. Sometimes that's a premise. So the question for if you have enough flexibility and you can get the ground to the foot, will the brain start to get in better form naturally? The short answer to that is it depends upon how long that problem has been there. If that problem has been there a week or a month or maybe 8 weeks, and the brain goes, I still remember how to move correctly, I'm gonna remind my body how to do it right. Hit Control Alt Delete and the body moves well. But the beauty of neuroplasticity is our brain changes quickly. The negative of neuroplasticity is our brain changes quickly. In other words, you put a rock in the shoe and within 2 or 3 hours, the brain starts to reprogram the way you move. Or in the research is if you tie 2 fingers together for 20 minutes, the brain starts to see those 2 fingers as one in 20 minutes. And then you take those, you untie it, and it takes a while, a couple of hours for the brain to change back. So you give yourself, 6 or 8 weeks of moving improperly, and the brain many times doesn't auto-reboot efficient function. It doesn't auto-reboot good muscle memory. So usually I need to, somewhere around that 4, 6, 12-week point, give someone some exercises so they can see themselves moving efficiently on one side, inefficiently on the other, and then they try to match. So many times it doesn't come back automatically is a short answer. But once it does come back, then the body starts to use those muscles and strength does start to build. So many times it doesn't is a short answer. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay. And I've got some dots handy.
Yep.
If you
and what Curtis is holding over here is sticky Velcro dots, which is the go-to hack for customizing insoles. If you need a little bit extra support and the green ones are too tall, the blue ones maybe they're just a little bit too low or it's not quite the right spot, we'll literally stick some little fuzzy Velcro dots on the bottom to kind of get just a little bit of extra support on there. it's actually a surprisingly effective way to customize an otherwise stock product. All right, let's try that. Let's see if we can get this cadence to work. Okay, hop back up on there. I'm going to connect you to the bike so don't just jump off. Boom.
Yes.
What I see you doing here is adapting his shoe and insole to a foot that is operating in a certain way.
That's correct.
But I would think that's not the end of the story.
Yes. So to repeat the question, you're absolutely right. We are accommodating, adapting, putting a beautiful Band-Aid on, so to speak. Because at the end of the day, people want to be able to ride today without pain. So if we can adapt, that gives people a better experience, more likely the muscles are going to wake up. But it's not the end of the story. On day 1, we accommodate on adapt. Hopefully on day 2 to day 20, the body gets better. The body gets more efficient, it gets more flexible, it gets stronger, and then we start to take away those accommodations, those Band-Aids, those adaptations. Because the body is healthier, it no longer needs so many Band-Aids, so to speak. And then we take them away and they're more efficient for not having them because the body doesn't need them any better. It's much like a lumbar support or a crutch. You need it when you need it and it makes the body better. But it's not the end of the story. Day number 1, accommodate, adapt, make the bike fit the body. Day number 2, get the body in a healthier position. Day number 3, you take away those accommodations. Is that the question? Absolutely. But we wouldn't be doing a good job if we didn't make him feel better today. So and it's many times possible. Probably the biggest challenge is people start to feel better and then they don't do their homework. Or we have lives and we don't do our homework. They don't go to see their PT, they don't do their massage, they don't do their strengthening, but on day 1 they feel better because the bike is adapted. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, so the adaptation here, we got the insoles in there, and now we've also got those Varus wedges in the shoes. I'm going to go ahead and start capturing the data. We'll check in here once we get a few seconds worth of data to get a good picture. Perfect. And then enter, where are we? Okay, cool. And back in, so we're reconnecting with that first met head on the left side, which is fantastic. The load is distributing differently on the right. It's filling in a little bit more, but it's still pretty heavy on the outside of the foot. And it would be really cool to be able to see that shift again more towards the inside. So obviously what we did with the Varus wedges wasn't quite enough. On the right side. Yeah, the left side is significantly better than it was at the start. So yeah, it's interesting. I just flipped between the two versions of it. That we ran with the mid-height insoles, and the left side looks very, very similar. So the green ones were definitely a bridge too far. This brought it right back to where we expected it to be. But good load across there, and seeing it starting to move. I'm pointing at the useless little screen here. Seeing that load start to move all the way across the forefoot. We're seeing some creep up in the middle. That left side's looking a lot better. And just hopefully trying to see a little bit more load filling in over here. This is where we can maybe start to, we'll put a little black dot under there and see if that brings the shoe up, or the base of the shoe up enough to the foot so that you can get some load under there. And the support under the forefoot, how does that feel in there right now?
Feels good.
Okay.
The left foot feels much better. Surprisingly, the right foot is now the one that's less happy.
Oh, interesting. So it's almost like this is like a bridge too far, or?
I'm not sure. It's just different.
Oh. Is it because the left foot's so much better that it makes the right foot feel bad in comparison?
It could, right? You pay attention to the squeaky wheels.
Right. We'll go ahead and hop off again.
And Justin, can you speak to it's not just about the foot when it comes to bike fit, meaning the seat position or the handlebars, all that can change.
Right. Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the factors that could be at play here, and you can really spin off into madness with the foot accommodations if you're not looking holistically at the person on the bike. And so particularly with the first met head getting down to the shoe, one of the big limiters can be saddle height. If the saddle's too high, and then they literally can't reach the pedal, like the constrained mechanical system of the pedaling will pull the shoe away from your foot at the bottom, and you're not able to effectively continue to put load through the pedal. That can be a big driver. There's all sorts of other things that can contribute as well. If you're sitting too far back or too far forward, it can change how the pressure gets distributed on the shoe. And this just provides a really useful backdrop to those changes to help inform what's going on and how those changes impact the person on the bike. So let's try we're going to do the right one.
Curtis, is the picture on the left ideal, or what would ideal look like?
I would like to see a little bit more distribution, a little more pressure to this first met, meaning just filling out this a little bit more, and maybe a little bit more load on the inside versus the outside. So he has, and you can't see it from where you're at, he has 350 millibars over here and about 400. I'd love to see this maybe 5 or even 550, and this being down in the low 3s. So just even more area over here and more force over here. But I give this probably I don't know, a B plus relative to what I like it. Yeah, B plus. Where this one right now I give C minus, if that makes sense. Justin, your opinion on that question?
Yeah, that's it. It's filling in under the first met head is what I would look for there, because it looks like it's more on the edge. It's not super centered, and seeing that more centered on the first met head maybe.
Should I take this one off too then?
The other thing that's a little hard to see from where you're at, there's a black line that's happening right here. That's kind of doing this. That's tracking where his pressure is at on the shoe and in the shoe. His center of mass, excuse me, or his center of pressure. So right now he's pushing mostly right through here versus what I'd love to see is his force going through the blue. Yeah, I'd love to see his force running more up and down. As compared to this side, you might be able to see this black line right through here. This is much more like it was when we started. All this force is running on the outside of the foot versus again where I'd like it to run, which is more down through the center. So that's what takes me over here to that B plus versus here. All that load is still through the outside. So pretty good on the left. Definitely, I would expect the left be enough that it would make a changes in his experience on the bike. Hey, I can go longer now before it starts to bug me, or I can climb more hills. But still not, yay, you solved my problem. Because A, his body still has issues, and B, we haven't distributed enough. Yeah, good question. Okay.
All right, so just to use some of those little black Velcro dots to build up a little bit more underneath the ball of the foot on the right side. Kind of trying, hopefully with that little bit extra material, to fill in some of this area here and do it in a way that doesn't feel uncomfortable. So, yeah, they're literally, you can show some here, but they're just these sticky little Velcro dots. Yeah, we buy there's big rolls of them that use them in all kinds of funny stuff.
Felt works really nicely as well.
But it's the soft side of the Velcro, so it's yep. And then go ahead and pedal. Let's see what we've got. How does that feel so far?
Good. It's a noticeable difference. I can feel that I'm actually making contact with the
Okay.
outside of the foot.
Let's see what's happening here. All right. Yeah, it's still not getting down there. There's definitely something limiting that contact. I and I'd be curious about doing some more exploration in what's going on, and at a certain point you also have to start to say, maybe the insole's not quite in there correctly or something, but because at this point I would start to expect to see something showing up, and it's just not showing up yet. So but so like the next step would be to do a little bit more looking into the foot, and okay, what's going on with the mechanics on the right foot that is causing that, and then I also start to really to question at this point, like, we're really not succeeding in getting the ball of foot down to the shoe. What's going on with the rest of the bike fit? He may be sitting a little bit too far back, and he's not really able to effectively load the front, the ball of the foot. Maybe the saddle's too high. There's a lot of other different factors that are going to go and come into play when it comes to that aspect of it.
And this is maybe where I mentioned that nasty bony overgrowth at the base of the big toe there. That's some arthritic change from having jammed my toe really hard when I was 12.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would hear that. So there might be some mechanical challenges on the right side that's making it hard for you to get down there.
Yeah, I wonder about that.
Yeah.
And there might be a solution for that.
Yep.
So we could start to explore bike fit here, and that's and or B, start to explore body fit and body health. I think I might be playing with both of them at the same time. So let's do a quick evaluation of fit, maybe seat height and fore aft, and then I'll do a little bit of a musculoskeletal eval as well.
Okay.
And I'm not sure whether the goniometer made it over here or not, or the plumb line made it over
Yeah, plumb line did. So yeah, go ahead and pedal along and just get yourself situated on the saddle there. It looks like you might be sitting just a hair far back, not in terms of the saddle itself. You're sitting on the part of the saddle you find comfortable, but where the saddle is on the bike. Okay. So stop pedaling and come forward to just level crank. Hold that right about there. And let's just take a look. That's actually not too bad. You're pretty much right over the pedal spindle, depending upon how you look at it here. You're right in the ballpark there. So, fore aft position isn't too bad. And come down to the bottom here and just stop right there. No, it didn't. Looking at leg extension here and seeing, and then come down to the bottom on this side. See where things live in terms of that aspect of it. Other body issues you experience on the bike, neck, back?
Not usually.
Okay. Pedal down to the bottom on the left here and stop right there. I'm going to bring your heel up a little bit.
We use video capture for this as opposed to just the static measurements. And that knee over pedal spindle is one measure of determining the forward backward of the saddle, and not the only measure. So it's important to know that this is a screen as opposed to the details. However, his knee angle,
yeah, it's low, meaning that you're not getting a lot of leg extension. So it's like almost 50 degrees. It's about 47 degrees static. Usually somewhere more in that 35-degree range, so quite a bit straighter for that static measurement. That can really change the dynamic, so being too high but also being too low, not being able to effectively extend into the pedal. Let's try raising the saddle a little bit and see what that does. Go ahead and hop off.
And while you do that, see if we can hand it back and forth for one another. I'm sorry, head up at that end.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that I said it backwards.
Okay, good. It wasn't just me.
No, but still face down.
Okay.
Slide down my way a little bit. Okay. So we're showing pressure mapping on the right a little worse than the left. However, you walked in today saying, I really want to get rid of this discomfort out here. So I'm going to focus on the left side to continue to make that healthier as opposed to trying to get the right side better. Because as I understood you, you're not right now having any discomfort on the right side with, yeah, perfect. So scoot back my way just a little more. I'd definitely be getting into his foot right now, and at the same time, I don't want to take off shoes and pressure map, etc. So I'm jumping up the part of the area where I see it's driving some of the pressure in the outside. As I start to flex up his foot, as I start to flatten out his foot in an efficient way, what I feel is there's this tightness that's kind of deep in the calf in here, and for Joel, he might have an experience of a little bit more discomfort in this area versus that area. What I feel over here, push your foot down into me gently and then relax. What I feel over here is kind of like a piece of steak that's been overcooked. Push down again and relax. When a muscle is nice and mobile, healthy, and relaxed, then push down again and relax. It feels like a rare piece of meat, if you will, which hopefully Joel is a rare piece of meat. He's a good catch. Sorry, that was a really bad joke, and that's going to go online now. I'm going to regret that, I think. Push down again and relax. And so what I'm doing is I'm finding these some of these tightnesses along some of his superficial and his deep calf muscles with the intention, push down again, contracting his muscle, engages the muscle, and then relax. And then as he relaxes, I then stretch it out. I loosen it up a little bit. And that starts to add mobility into the muscle, the fascia, and as I get down here in the ankle into the joint a bit as well. So my intention here, and you're down over there, push down again. My intention here, there you go, one more time, and relax, is just to start to add options, add mobility options so that his foot might have the ability to get down to the pedal a little bit more. And one more time, and relax. And I'm working on mobility of the soft tissues, the muscles, the fascia. And then a moment ago, I was starting to work on the mobility of the joint, the ability of one bone to move relative to another bone so he's not so stuck into this more pressure on the outside. Go ahead and hop off for me. We, however, have introduced two variables. Yeah, thank you. We have introduced two variables, hop back on the bike, which is now seat height as well as body treatment. So as we watch our pressure map, if it's changed, and then we don't know where it came from, but I wanted to double do. And just check back into your experience there.
Well, my left ankle feels a bit more free. And actually, I like the how high?
5 mil.
5 mil?
Yeah, not very much.
Actually, I like that.
Oh.
Did you move? So the saddle placement still same.
Yeah, I literally, so it's slightly farther back, but it's 5 mil taller than it was. So. Oh yeah, so one of the things, and again, I'm not sure if you can see it on the video, but on the left foot, everything seems to be happening on the left foot, is that the where the pressure is kind of moving has shifted towards the center of the shoe, meaning that pressure is a little bit more balanced and it's a little bit more centered between the met heads, and that's actually a really positive improvement. Being able to see it shift that load from off the side, where that's sort of the driver, or it's pivoting off the side to being centered on the shoe like that. Obviously, the right shoe is still seeing some significant load on the outside of the foot, and there's obviously a lot more structural issues with the right foot that are contributing as well. So, but being able to see this kind of improvement just from raising the saddle 5 millimeters, that's pretty significant. And that would for me would say that we are moving in the right direction in terms of changes to the bike that are helping with the core problem of the foot issue. So I think that was a positive improvement. And just checking in on leg extension, just hang out right where you are there for a second. Actually come down just a little bit more right there. And going from, where are we here? Yeah, I mean, it's low 40s now instead of high 40s in terms of leg extension. So definitely still on the lower side, but do you experience knee discomfort at all? Anything? No patellofemoral issues or anything? You know, having the saddle a little bit low, the main side effect is potentially having some knee problems. To the extent that you can get away with it, then it should be okay. But the key is being able to balance that against all the other variables. So seeing just a little bit of improvement, you know, if we were doing a more in-depth exploration in bike fit with Joel, I would definitely want to be going out to the point where maybe we got a little too high on the saddle and then titrating that back down and seeing how that comes through with all the other data. So, but moving up is definitely moving in the right direction. And
cool. Yes. And how do you let the crank length play into this? Because obviously it moves it forward by half or down by half centimeter if you use a longer crank length.
Right. I mean, the crank length obviously can change the foot's position on the lever arm, and it could show up here in foot pressure mapping. And in terms of the length, you typically for a shorter crank, you would raise the saddle the equivalent of the crank arm difference. So if you went from a 172.5 to a 165, you'd raise the saddle 7.25 millimeters, and that would get you into that same extension point. The shorter crank arms can do a lot of other things in terms of the bike fit that you want to accommodate for, other than just saddle height. But they change where the foot is in relation to your center of mass, and that neo-pedal spindle variable, which is, as Curtis mentioned, it's not the end-all be-all, but it is going to change where the force gets delivered. So if it could be a way to bring the pedal more underneath, more perpendicular to the way force is generated on the bike. So.
Do you set it to a certain height depending on the person, or is it more preference, or how do you determine that? Because that changes how you measure.
Yes. Yeah, no, the main thing is just looking at kind of what the variables you're trying to control for. So a lot of times with short crank arms, you're trying to really improve the cyclist's ability to get through the top of the pedal stroke. And the way that the foot pressure and those other aspects of it are affected by it are sort of secondary issues, and you're really trying to look at getting extra clearance for hip flexion at the top of the pedal stroke. So that extra saddle height is the main goal of that intervention. So.
Am I understanding your question to be, how do you determine what appropriate crank length is?
Yeah, for a person,
yeah.
Height and all that kind of stuff, what they're used to.
Right. So for me, the short answer to that is obviously as bikes get taller, crank arms get more. And so I usually start with what's on there because it's usually relatively proportional to the femur length. However, many times it's too long for their flexibility, especially as Justin was talking about at the top of the crank length or at the top of the pedal stroke. So sometimes we need to go into shorter cranks even though their leg length might say longer cranks. So I start out with what's there, and then there are equations out there that says, hey, given a particular inseam, you multiply that number, inseam number, and it spits out a crank length. That's a nice place to start. But usually what happens is we say, oh, as you come over the top of the pedal stroke, you don't have enough hip mobility, and therefore let's go to a shorter crank to accommodate for that hip mobility. There's nice research out there now showing that shorter cranks don't change power at all because they end up just increasing their cadence a little bit to make up for that shorter crank. However, what usually happens in my experience is because they can come across the top easier, they don't get slowed down across the top, and therefore it usually ends up improving their power and decreases some of the rotation in the pelvis. So I use what they've got to begin with. I look at a calculator number 2, and frequently I'm going shorter because I'm not using them as an accommodation tool without any negatives. Does that catch you?
And the flip side of the coin is, so if I put my numbers in that calculator, it says I need like 220 millimeter crank arms, which is ridiculous. There's zero situation when that makes any sense. And in general, going to a shorter crank, but up to most bikes are to come with up to a 175, and that's fine, depending upon mobility and depending upon the rider's needs. But as Curtis mentioned, power output just isn't impacted by crank, so you use them as a lever to pull for fit accommodations more so than anything.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay, let's start wrapping up. Other things that you wanted to say before we finish up?
Actually, I
Yes,
have one
please.
question.
Oh,
So-
Joel, yes.
Yeah,
Hey.
So pedal choices. So SPD is a narrow platform.
Yeah.
Would my foot things be better served by a wider road style pedal, or does it make a difference?
Potentially, the SPDs are inherently less stable because the whole point of the system is to clear mud effectively, and then secondarily to be able to walk on them. And so there's a lot less contact between the cleat and the pedal, like there is in a road system. But depending upon how stiff your shoe is, the shoe can make up for a huge amount of that stability because it'll distribute the pedaling load really effectively. And so paradoxically, one way that you might be able to help this is to get a stiffer soled shoe, which they don't make in the Easy Bake oven version anymore. So it's always challenging. But sometimes the pedal is less critical as long as that stability isn't a huge factor. And it could be. And road pedals can be more stable than this pedal can be.
And I think to add on to that, going back to what you're asking is the increase in pedal width or pedal stability might not make a difference, but pedal axle width definitely does. So that's what we're going to need to explore is depending upon, are your cranks made of carbon and they're not, can we put some washers or some spacers there? How much threading's there? What's safe? Can we look at pedal extenders? Can we look at, can we get this style of pedal with a longer spindle? We need to look at, and I don't want to go in the depths of that here, but we need to look at how we get you wider, how we get your stance wider, not necessarily the platform wider. The other thing to say about mountain bike shoes and the SPDs is it distributes, it's not just where the cleat is, but on this shoe itself, you've got those treads running up the outside, and the treads actually contact the pedal a little bit as well. So it's not just the width of the pedal, there's the width of the spindle to some extent. So so maybe a wider pedal might make a difference for you. For some problems it does, but for me, I'm not so confident about that. But certainly a wider stance width, I believe, would make a significant difference. So we've already seen that.
Okay. And then one more follow-on question.
Yes, please.
Easy Bake shoes.
Yes.
So now there's these nice the shoes with the soft uppers and the boa constrictor adjusters, and I'm wondering if that's a good way to get around the wide forefoot, narrow rear foot thing. So a more conforming upper with the boa constrictor cable.
Yeah. For me, not so much, because then you end up with a lower that's this wide and a foot that's then an upper that's this wide, and then you end up just squishing that foot with the. I really want the base, the lower, the last, if you will, to be outside of the foot, and the foot to be setting on top of it. So there are shoes that would probably fit the last that would probably fit your wide forefoot. I've got some pairs, and there's options out there. And I think that I haven't looked at the width of your shoe versus the width of your foot to be able to answer whether you've already solved that. My bet, honestly, and just looking at your foot without measuring it, is that you have solved that part of the problem. Yeah. Other questions? I appreciate your questions, Joe. Okay. Other questions from the audience before we wrap up? Okay. What I'd be doing for Joel right now is we continue the bike fit, making some other adjustments as appropriate. I'd certainly be doing some manual treatment, and more importantly for him, sending him home with some exercises, some which you'll see in What the Foot Part 1. You'll see some exercises I gave him there. So you can take a look back at those, but we'd be giving him some exercises, doing some treatment, and then over time be taking out some of these accommodations as his body got healthier. Okay. If there's no other questions, we'll call it a day and wrap up on the video as well. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.